Hello and welcome to our very first episode of Faith Chapel Online. Today in our session we're going to be talking about why Jesus. And we're going to kind of summarize that a little bit towards the end of our today's session. Many years ago we used to have these things to get us around called maps. This was way before the GPS came in and Google Maps came in. So you have to go down to like the gas station or grocery store if you actually wanted to go somewhere and on a trip and plan it out, your itinerary. Make sure you don't get lost. So you'd have to go down these the gas station and you get this map and they would have it of like the United States or just a state. And you would go in there and you get your map and you'd pull it all out and you unfold it. It would start off like this big, and once you unfold it, it would be very, very massive, and you had to pinpoint where you were and all the different roads and the different directions that you wanted to go. Today, as technology is advanced, we went from maps to GPS, and then now like Google Maps on our phones. Pretty easy to get places when you really want to go because the phone's got to direct us. Navigation. Sometimes life's a lot like that. You kind of find yourself in different positions in your life and you're trying to figure out what's the best direction to go. Certain times particularly in your life, you're looking at going, kind of like that fork in the road, and you're trying to figure out what's the best direction to go and what decision I make could very well impact my destination. Years ago, I was traveling through Arizona, and we had one of those GPS. This was before the phones had Google Maps and navigations in our cars and all these different things. And we had this little tiny square GPS system that was supposed to give us directions. And we made a wrong turn. Next thing you know, we were really lost, and we're trying to figure out our way back. And this GPS system just kept ringing off the same sound when possible, make a legal U-turn. And after a while, that gets a bit, frustrating because you're trying to figure out where you're at and find your way back. Again, going back to how that could be with us with life, we try to figure out our way, and sometimes we're looking at life and going, what direction should I go? Now, if we make the decision to go left, is that going to end in a dead end? Is that going to end us in a bad situation? If we make the decision to go right, is that going to end in a bad situation? Could we find ourselves going down a road and all of a sudden we see the sign dead end, and then we hear the phone go, when possible, make a legal U-turn? There's a story in the Bible, in the book of Luke, of a guy named Zacchaeus. And he was a tax collector, which back in those days, tax collectors weren't the most popular people. But of all the tax collectors, he was very, very wealthy. He was probably one of the wealthiest tax collectors in all of the land, which made him all the more hated. People didn't really like him the most. He was really considered the worst of sinners because he stole people's money, and he would take their money, and why he sat on piles and piles of money. One day, though, he heard down the road that Jesus was coming. He was looking all around for him, and there was a large crowd gathering because the word had gotten out that Jesus was coming. As he was walking down the path, the crowds gathered larger and larger and larger. So Zacchaeus couldn't see him. So he thought to himself, I'm going to climb this tree, and maybe from the tree, I might be able to see Jesus coming down the road. As Jesus approached, he saw Zacchaeus up in the tree. And he looked up at him and said, Zacchaeus, get down from the tree. Today, I must be a guest in your home. Now, at that point, a lot of people looked at this and going, oh my gosh, Jesus is sitting in the house of the sinner. The worst of the worst, the most terrible person ever. How is it possible that Jesus would dine with this horrible person that robs us and takes our money? Jesus sat and had dinner with the worst of the worst. the sinner of all sinners. And as he sat down and he had dinner, a conversation started between him and Zacchaeus. Zacchaeus came to him and said, Lord, I'm going to give half of my wealth. And whatever I've taken from the poor, I'm going to give it back 4 times as much. Jesus looked at him and said, salvation has come to this house today. And then he says the most profound thing. For I came to seek and save the lost. That very moment, coming down the road, was the Savior. A person that came to seek and to save. At that moment, Zacchaeus, who was the worst of the worst, considered the worst person around because he robbed and he stole from the poor, had an encounter with Jesus. A life-changing encounter with Jesus. So the question that we started our session with was, why Jesus? Let's flip that question back around and say, why not Jesus? Why not Jesus? When we are facing life challenges and we have decisions we have to make in life, and we look to a map for direction, when we have the Bible as life's map, it has written out the way and how to deal with certain situations and how we deal with life. Whenever we have problems in our life, we look to God for direction. I'll close with this. Jesus said that the wise person who listens to my teachings and does what I say is like a person who builds his house on the rock. When the storms of life come, and I'm paraphrasing, and the winds beat against the house, and the rains come down hard, the house still stands. But the foolish person, the person who hears what I have to say and chooses to ignore it, is like a person who builds his house on the sand. When the storms of life come, the rain comes pouring down and the winds blow against the house crumbles. So the wise man listens and does, and the foolish man chooses to ignore. As we look upon our lives, when we find ourselves in a situation where we have to decide, do I go right or do I go left? What map do we want to choose to follow? Do we want to follow the Google Maps that tell us which way, which direction to go? Or do we want to trust in God and pray about it and ask God what direction in our life we should take? That's our conclusion of our very first episode of Faith Chapel Online.